Hello and welcome. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what you're doing now? Hello. I was born in Peoria, Illinois. My parents discovered my deafness, I would say, when I was about a year and a half years old. And it really came as a big shock because I was born healthy and I was a healthy baby. I had no serious illnesses. I had some falls, but what caused my deafness, really, only God knows the answer to that. And then they found out there was a school for the deaf in St. Louis, so I moved close to the school so that I could commute on weekends. And it was really a blessing for me. Then, when I finished school, I moved back to Peoria because that's where my father's work was. I went to high school and then on to college, and I decided to enter the convent. Since I left my formation years of 5 years, I then taught the deaf, later got involved with pastoral work, counseling, and a myriad of other things. So I suppose you could say I was a Jill of all trades. What is it like to know that you are one of the only culturally deaf nuns in the entire U.S.? Well, to be honest, I never really thought of it because it seemed normal for me. Until, that is, I moved to the East Coast and I met a lot of deaf people there. And then I began to realize that there were many other nuns just like me, culturally deaf. And how did you get your calling to become a nun? Well, at first, I discovered that I was called to teach. And I found out through playing games. I was playing with my sisters and brothers. I guess I was about 9 years old. And then I thought of becoming a nun. That came later, though. Why I thought of it, I don't know. I just felt it in my heart. I wanted to become a nun to teach deaf people all kinds of things that they didn't know about. That's my calling. But I think other thoughts were that I believed it would be nice, but I couldn't really see myself just focusing on raising a family. And, I'm a people person and I like adventure. I like to be out meeting people and learning different ways of doing things. Oh, and then I really loved mysteries, mystery movies, and I was good at the who done it, And I made some mistakes, of course, but and then I thought it would be kind of fun to be a detective, maybe the first female detective. And then I realized that really had no connection to the church, and I needed to have something connected to faith. So I kind of forgot about that and decided I would become a nun because it fit me much better. How many years have you been a nun? 51 years now. I've been working with the deaf for 51 years, 46 years actively. Then when I retired, I guess it was about almost 10 years ago, I was still doing some volunteer work. But I have to admit the volunteer work really keeps me busy, and it keeps me actively working. You've been a nun for quite some time, so what are some of the types of services that you've done? Well, I was supposed to be a counselor for the deaf in the school, but the principal at that time decided that I shouldn't be a counselor. It was a big shock, so he put me in the dormitories. And so I would play with the kids and do after school activities. After a year of that, I moved to Chicago with hopes that I would find, a teaching job, with the deaf, and finally got one. And I was working with the deaf there as a teacher for 3 or 4 years. And then something happened with the administration there. So I moved to St. Louis, and they asked me to open a learning center at St. Joseph's. So and I was there for about a year and a half, and then I finally got to teach the deaf there at the School for the Deaf. And I taught school kids from, oh, 6th to 8th grade. And at the same time, there were deaf adults that I knew that grew up with that would come to me and ask me a lot of questions about faith and about the Bible, and I realized that these children have everything in school, yet these adults didn't have this. They missed a lot of this after they left school. So I prayed and prayed about it and talked to Father Walsh, and he was the director of the NCOD, the National Organization of the Deaf, at that time, and he opened a new program as a pastoral worker with the deaf. And so I was there, applied, and got accepted, and I moved to Washington, D.C. And I went to Gallaudet at the Catholic University and got my certificate, and then moved to New York City and worked with the deaf in the pastoral ministries, and it was a wonderful time during those years. And I worked at Camp Mark 7 during the summer months as well, every year. And then my relatives started to kind of decline. So my sister had a full-time job and was trying to help take care of them, and then it was hard for her, so I moved back home to help with that, and I went to Chicago. So I commuted between Peoria and Chicago so that I could help out with my relatives until they'd all passed. I was in Chicago for 12 years, and then I needed a community, so I decided to move back to St. Louis, and the big joy of many deaf people there. So I I started a home care program for deaf senior citizens, because there wasn't anything to serve the deaf seniors at that time in the city. After 9 years of that, I decided to retire so that I could focus on helping them grow in their faith, and so I've been doing volunteer work ever since. What about you setting up the MFP, the Ministry Formation Program? MFP does mean the Ministry Formation Program. I developed that with Father Joseph Mulroney in Chicago. There were so many deaf Catholic people that wanted to work in the church but had no formal training. So the MFP was set up to train deaf adults to become involved in church ministry using whatever skill sets they had. And I was director of that program for 10 years before I moved to St. Louis. And the program itself is still going. While I was there, there were 27 people that finished or graduated the program, and I'm sure since there have been at least 10 or 15 more that have graduated. Wow, as far as ministry goes, you've really served in a lot of capacities. Which one of all those do you feel that you're most proud of? Well, to be honest, I think I was most proud of all of them. And I think that's because I felt there was so much growth and so much compared to, the oral world and the culturally deaf world. I met so many wonderful deaf people, deaf authors, deaf inventors, deaf teachers, just all kinds of people that I thank God every day for that blessing. What do you like most about being a nun? Oh, I can't really pick one answer. I think it's everything. One thing I feel blessed is that God chose me. I don't feel worthy, because I've met so many different women who've come to me and said, I'm thinking about becoming a nun. And then I'm thinking to myself, why did God pick me instead of this person? It was always my answer that if they're thinking about becoming a nun, why would God have picked me instead of them? Why me? That's all. Your biggest challenge, what is it? Oh, my challenge now is, well, I've been a sister for 51 years, and I've worked with, the deaf for 51 years as well. And I know that there's just a lot more that needs to be done out there. And I really wish I could become all things for all people, but I know that I can't. I just hope that people that I've worked with and that I've taught pass on what they've learned from me and what they've shared with me so that, you know, deaf people can continue to grow working in the ministry for future generations. People looking at our interview today, what's one thing you'd like to tell them? There are a lot of problems that happen in our life, and people tend to just give up and lose faith and lose God. And I was like that too in some ways. And I think what hit me the most was a quote from a Lutheran woman. Her name was Corrie ten Boom. She was a Dutch woman who was captured by the Germans and thrown into a concentration camp. And when she came home, she was telling the story of her experiences in the camps and what she went through. And and they said, "You must have, I told you you need to come to church and tell people about your story." And she said, "Sure." I said, "I'm sure you must be bitter about all of that happened." And she said, "No." And what she said was, every place and every person God puts in your life is perfect preparation for the future that only He knows. So for me, for example, I wanted to become a teacher for the deaf, and I thought that, I was going to be a teacher in that school until I became old. And that didn't happen. I was put here to teach deaf adults, then I was put there to teach at Camp Mark 7, and I was put someplace else to teach the MFP, and I taught all over the place and in different capacities. God was preparing me for my future that I didn't know, only He knew. So wow, I feel it was graceful in so many ways that I experienced that for all those years. Thank you so much for your time in your interview today. God bless you. Thank you. My pleasure.